The Bite of the Mango, Chapter 6 and 7. One afternoon when I was little, I was sitting underneath a coconut tree when a tiny yellow and brown weaver dropped suddenly from the sky. I don't know what made the little bird fall, but it landed with a thud on the red clay earth. I moved to help it, then decided not to. The weaver was injured. It was better off dying on its own than having me take it back to the village, where it would likely die in pain a day or two later, or worse, live out its life with a broken wing. For the longest time, I watched as the stubborn bird tried to stand up on its crooked little legs, flapping its wings widely, only to topple over and lie still before trying all over again. Then something miraculous happened. After the bird had lain motionless for so long, I thought it was dead. It stood up as solid as ever and lifted off into the sky. When I saw Ibrahim and Mohammed, I felt like that bird. Something had knocked me clear out of the sky, and here I was, on the ground, trying to get up, but I couldn't, and I wondered if I'd ever have the perseverance of that small weaver. I sat in a trance, not moving, my glazed eyes locked on Ibrahim's eyes, and then moved to Mohammed's. What broke the spell was Ibrahim. With a defeated sigh, he looked down at his arms, which were bandaged like mine. The rebels cut off his hands, too. I gasped at the realization, and then I saw that Mohammed was cradling his arms the exact same way. I felt a chill. Though it was very warm in the back of the truck with all our bodies crammed so close together, my head slipped onto the shoulder of the person sitting next to me. "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't," a soft female voice replied. The woman gently pushed my head back down on her fleshy shoulder, then stroked my forehead with her fingers. To avoid the rebels, the Ekimog truck took a longer route to Freetown, along a rough road full of potholes and ditches. Somehow I managed to catch a bit of sleep, with my head still on my neighbor's shoulder. I awoke when the truck stopped, and then the woman turned toward me. "What happened to you, sweet girl?" she asked quietly, wiping some hair out of my eyes. "No, don't answer. Save your voice." She poured some water onto a cloth, then ran it over my forehead and cheeks. "My name is Famata," she said. "My uncle was caught in the attack of Manarmal like you, I am guessing. My brother and I are here with him." She gestured to the two men sitting beside her. One of them was covered from head to toe in caked blood. Ekimog soldiers were helping people disembark from the truck. My body tightened when it was my turn, and my lips started to quiver. Famata sensed my anxiety. "We're in Lungri," she told me. "We need to take a boat to Freetown, just a short distance over the water." It was dark by now, and on the far shore I could see lights going up the sides of the building, taller than palm trees. Lights appeared to be hanging everywhere. In Magbrew, we lived our nights in darkness, except for the light from the fire or the few kerosene lamps we owned. "May I stay with you?" Famata asked in a low voice. She was a little taller than me, I could see as we stood side by side, and a bit heavier. I guess she was about 20. Famata led me to the Pam Pam, a boat similar to the long wooden canoe men used in Magbrew to fish. I spied a few older Pam Pams in the water, sunk down with only their helms sticking out. "No," I cried. "I can't go. I will sink. I'm sure it will." I had never been in a boat before, and I knew there was no way I could swim without my hands. Famata assured me that everything would be all right. "I'll hold you the entire time," she said. "We will get to the other side safely." We were the last people to board. The boat moved smoothly, and my apprehension lifted as I watched the lights of the city dance over the water. I had always wanted to visit Freetown, because the adults in the village talked about how big and exciting it was. Once we landed, Ekimog soldiers led us to another truck. The vehicle made a singing noise as we moved through the streets of Freetown. I know now it was a siren. In the west, ambulances blared to tell drivers to get out of the way. But in Freetown, the people crowded onto the streets and didn't seem to notice. They walked right in front of that truck, not bothering to step aside. If I had been healthy, I could have reached the hospital more quickly on foot. When we arrived at the front gate of the hospital, a woman in a nurse's uniform directed us to a building at the end of the big complex of hospital wards. "She's telling us to go there for the night," Famata said. "Don't worry, you little one. I will stay with you tonight." The stench from the building reached me before I even walked inside. Blood, vomit, and sweat. The auditorium was crowded with people lying on the bare cement floor. Blood was everywhere. As I passed through the door with Famata by my side, I felt like one of Muhammad's ghosts on the lookout for a healthy body to possess. But this building held no one healthy. Everyone was sick. When I sat down, I immediately threw up. I was among the first to be treated the next morning. Some nurses took me to a bright white room with a huge light hanging from the ceiling. One of the nurses explained it was an operating room. The doctor, a man with a gruff voice, wore a long white coat and glasses. He spoke Creole, but one of the nurses translated his words into Temne for me. Did I know anyone in Freetown, he asked. Yes, my uncle Suleiman, I said. Do you know where he lives? Suleiman was Marie and my father's youngest brother. I had never visited him, but I knew he was a businessman in Dovecut, a shopping area in Freetown. The doctor stuck what looked like a long sewing needle into my arm, which he said would put me to sleep. When I awoke, it was nightfall, and Famata was by my bedside. I was in a big room lined with beds. It was a girls' ward, Famata told me, filled with patients my age and younger. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. Whenever the doctor had given me, made me woozy. My arms had been bandaged in bright white material. Not a speck of blood showed through the fabric. Famata held a spoonful of plain white rice up to my mouth. Before I could swallow it, I threw up. You need to eat, she said gently. You need food to give you energy, so we will try again later. I fell asleep before I could answer. The next day, when Famata came to visit, she told me her uncle had died from his wounds. She had been crying, and I could see she was very sad. When she asked if I'd like to try walking, I nodded yes. Then let's go see those boys you know from the truck, she suggested. They've been asking for you. As soon as we entered the boys' ward, I spotted Ibrahim. He was lying on one of the many metal cots that filled the room. Hi, Mariatu, he said, a smile crossing his face. He didn't sit up. Like me, it would take him some time to learn how to do things without hands. Are you okay? He asked. I nodded, blinking back tears. Don't you be crying here, Mariatu, I heard Muhammad call. He sat on the edge of the bed directly behind Ibrahim's, his legs dangling, his arms bandaged like mine. Muhammad had a big fat grin he always wore. Despite the ordeal he had been through, his eyes sparkled. I guess we're equal now, he said as I sat beside him. What do you mean? Well, how are we going to wrestle? No one will win. I don't know where it came from, but I laughed and laughed. I felt like that little weaver bird again, but this time I had a feeling I could learn to fly. Chapter 7. You're pregnant. I didn't understand the female doctor in the white coat was saying, though she was speaking Temne. My eyes moved from the doctor's round face to her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. Abibatu, Mary's younger sister, was standing beside the doctor. She had arrived in Freetown from Port Loko about a week earlier. You're pregnant, the doctor said to me again. You're going to have a baby. Do you understand? Abibatu, a large woman with Marie's warm smile, had tears in her eyes. How did this happen to you? She asked me. I don't know, I muttered. I don't know. It didn't make any sense. Since her arrival, Abibatu had taken on many of Famata's responsibilities, including helping me bathe. One evening, as she was dipping a cloth into the soapy cold water, she had exclaimed, Mariatu, your breasts are swollen. When did you last have your time? Abibatu was referring to my period. Mary had said that I'd eventually get it once every full moon or so, but it wasn't regular yet, and I couldn't remember when the last had come. Have you been eating since you came to the hospital? Abibatu had asked me next. I shook my head. Anything I tried to eat, including plain white rice or cornmeal, I could immediately throw up. I'd feel sick to my stomach the moment I smelled food coming down the hallway. Sometimes I could swallow a few spoonfuls of the food I carefully took myself, holding the metal spoon in between my bandaged arms, but more often than not, I'd motion for Famata or Abibatu to bring me a bucket before the spoon even hit my lips. I want the doctor to run some tests on you, Mariatu, Abibatu had said worriedly. I think you might be pregnant. Wasn't quite sure what pregnant meant, but before I could ask her, another woman and another girl with no hands had entered the bathing room. Abi Batu helped me out of the tub and dried me off. When Abi Batu and I got back to the girls' ward after learning I was pregnant, Solomon and his second wife, yet another Mariatu, were there to greet us. The hospital had tracked him down, and since then he had visited me at least once a day. Solomon was crying, big sobs that seemed to come from deep within his belly. It was shocking. I'd never seen a man cry before. He was also agitated, and as soon as he saw me, he started waving his arms. "Who did this to you, Mariatu?" he demanded angrily. "I will kill him with my own hands." I'd always liked Solomon. Whenever he visited Megbrew, he'd bring all the kids candy from Freetown. Solomon didn't talk down to us like many adults did, and he often joined in our games. Now he was scowling and furious. He launched into a tirade, first blaming Marie for what had happened to me, and then starting it on Sierra Leone's president for not stopping the war, and on foreigners for not coming to our country's aid. I wasn't always sure what he was talking about. Finally, he calmed down, saying he wanted me to come and live with him and his wife. Mariatu stepped forward with a smile to agree. "You need to get better first," Solomon continued. "Your wounds are not quite healed, and you are still on medication to fight infection. I've spoken to the doctors, so I know they expected they come out to be good. You will be fine. As fine as you can be without hands, and we will help you look after the baby." When Solomon and Mariatu had left, I sat on my bed with Abi Batu. "Who did this to you?" she asked gently, rubbing her hands up and down my arms. "Did the rebels give you a baby?" I was really confused. All I had heard was that babies came from a woman's belly button. When a woman in Megbrew had a child inside her, her tummy would swell, and then, when she began to waddle like a white-chested duck from the ponds, the woman would enter the house of the medicine woman. A few other village women would go inside too. Screams soon followed, sometimes lasting for a day and a night. A day or two later, the women would emerge smiling, holding in their arms a tiny baby. "No, the rebels did not do this to me," I told Abi Batu. "But there must be a mistake. Only women have babies, not girls." My eyes searched her face for some answers. Abi Batu swung her legs around and climbed up beside me. We lay close together as she explained to me how babies were made. After her explanation, Abi Batu left me alone to sleep. I lay very still, thinking over what she had told me about sex and men. And then I knew what had happened to me. About a month before we fled to Manarma, we were all in the bush, having heard yet another rumor that the rebels were approaching. It was near the end of Ramada, and Marie and Ali went back to Megbrew ahead of us to pray and to check that things were safe. One night after dinner, Ibrahim and Muhammad went to bed early, leaving Adamsi and me by the fire alone. We were sitting quietly under the stars, watching the fire fade, when Salu approached us. "Yamari and Pa Ali asked me to watch over you girls," he said with a crooked smile. My back stiffened, my body tingled, as if in warning from head to toe. I didn't like this man, not one bit. There was something about him I feared. I sat alert and still at the fire, turned to glowing coals. I felt too frightened even to move. I said nothing as Adamsi and Salier talked about Megbrew and the village people. Eventually I found the strength to stand up and say goodnight. We had made beds for ourselves out of twigs and leaves, and I burrowed into mine, but I couldn't sleep, and for good reason. Not long after, I heard heavy footsteps coming near me. I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I hoped it was Adamsi, whose bed was beside mine, but I knew it wasn't. Salier lay down beside me. I didn't believe he would do anything to me if I appeared to be sleeping, but he started touching me all over, fondling my breasts and my hair, making his way in between my legs. That's when I sat up. "What are you doing here? Where is Adamsi?" I shouted. Salier just smiled his sinister smile and began touching me some more. He could smell his stale breath and sweat. "Stop, stop, stop," I yelled. Finally, I screamed at the top of my lungs. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps and then Ibrahim's voice. "What is it? What is it?" Salier jumped up, smoothing his cotton shirt and pants. I pulled down my skirt, which was now high above my waist. Mariatu is having a nightmare, Salier, acting like he had just arrived, told Muhammad and Ibrahim when they appeared. He knelt down and gave me a kiss on the forehead. "It's nothing, child," he said. "Go back to sleep. I'll find a damsey and you two can be together and feel safe." The next day, we 4 kids went back to Megbru. Salier returned to his village to be with his first wife and 2 young children. I felt a sense of relief, hoping I would never have to see this man again. I was embarrassed and confused about what he had done to me. I told no one. But soon Salier started visiting Megbru on a regular basis. He'd come right into our house and ask Ali for a hammer, or Marie for some peppers, or a needle and some thread, saying his family was short on supplies because of the war. The whole time he was there, he'd look at me through the slits in his corners of his eyes. My body broke out in goosebumps whenever he was around. I could smell him even after he left. "Marie, I need to tell you something," I piped up one afternoon as we were washing some pots by the river. "Salier is not a good man. Out in the bush, he touched me. He scares me. I don't want to marry him. I never want to be around him again." I will never forget what happened next. Marie turned, pulled a whipping stick from the ground, and smacked me across the face so hard I was sure I was bleeding. I didn't move. I was in shock. "Don't you just respect Salier?" Marie said to me in a hard voice. "He is a good man. He would never want to hurt you. He wants to protect you. Don't speak badly of your elders again." Marie and I went back to washing. I took back my tears. A few days later, Salier came to our house when I was the only one there. The others were all out at the farm. "Where's Marie?" he asked when he saw me. "Coming," I lied. I wanted him to think she'd be right back. "I will wait," he said, sitting down on one of the benches in the parlor. As I turned to leave, he jumped up and grabbed me by the waist and started hitting and kicking him. "If you make any noise," he said coldly, "I will make sure you are punished." Salier dragged me down the hall and threw me onto the floor in the room at the back of the hut. He stuffed a piece of fabric into my mouth, tore off my top, and pulled up my skirt so high it covered my face. I could feel him on top of me, then inside of me, pounding, hurting. I tried to get loose, to kick, to scratch, but he was too strong. I was a small 12-year-old. He was a big muscle man like Ali. When Salier was finished, he pulled my skirt down, smoothed out my hair, and stroked my cheek. He bent down so low that his nose was touching mine. "Don't tell anyone," he said in a harsh, low voice. He pulled the fabric from my mouth and kissed me softly on the lips. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I wasn't sure, for one thing, exactly what it was Salier had done. Now I knew, and I was going to have a baby. I sat up in my bed in the girls' ward and looked around. My eyes landed on the blue pills that Abi Batu had said were painkillers. They were sitting in a small container on top of the table beside my bed. The other girls in the ward were sound asleep. I pushed back the sheet, now drenched in sweat, and swung my legs around until I was standing on the bare cement floor. I grabbed the pill bottle between my arms and sat back down on the bed. With my bandages, I tried to pry open the lid. My arms hurt from the pressure, but I didn't give up. After some concerted effort, the lid opened. I stopped for a moment to pray. "Take me, Allah. Take my baby and me. I want to die."